Hello and welcome to Balanced Existence. Today I have a powerful channeled message for you. I was just sitting in meditation for over 30 minutes, and the inner child has been on my mind a lot, and the journey of healing the inner child. And so I'm going to describe exactly what I saw during this meditation, and then I'm going to bring it around to the concept of the inner child, the present self, and the higher self, and this kind of triangle connection between the three of them. So bear with me as I try to explain these quantum concepts, but I really trust that there's going to be a message here for you regarding the healing of your inner child on your spiritual journey. So what I saw was this concept of us, our being, our body, being made of infinite particles or almost like specks, and each one of them making up the essence of our being. It's kind of like how a picture can be broken down into multiple pixels, and then each pixel can also infinitely be broken down further. It's this infinite energy that makes up who we are, energetically, but also of our physical being. And so I was seeing another example of a beam of light, which we can call divine source energy. And you could take a strand of that light, like a strand of hair on your head, but of the beam of light, and how there would be infinite strands of those beams of light. And I know that these are such quantum and maybe even seem like random concepts, but what I'm getting at here is the infinite nature of our beings and the infinite nature of the light that makes up our being. The light that we channel or draw upon through our healing and spiritual awakening journey. And so when something is infinite, whether it's the light that runs through us or the specks or particles of matter or the pixels that make up our physical being, each of those pieces of us has their own frequency. And some are of higher frequencies, some are of lower frequencies. And this is not in terms of the egoic descriptions or judgments such as positive versus negative. It's not to say that lower frequencies are negative, even though, of course, in the physical realm, our ego does interpret them as such. And that is the constraints and limits of the labels of the physical world that we live in. But I'm speaking on a very quantum level. And when we talk about higher and lower frequencies, it's really something that can be quantified energetically. So a higher frequency versus a lower frequency is simply a mathematical concept in the sense that it's a quantity of a certain amount of energy, a higher amount or a lower amount. And so these frequencies, and if you're not already familiar with the map of consciousness by David Hawkins, this is what we're talking about. So lower frequencies are like shame and guilt and fear and sadness and anger, whereas higher frequencies are things like love, peace, enlightenment. And so, of course, you're likely interpreting that as negative versus positive just because that's the labels that our ego assigns, and that's the world that we live in. But on the quantum level, they're simply frequencies. So if you were to take one pixel or one particle of your being or one strand of that beam of light that flows through you from source energy, you could alter the frequency. And when we do very powerful transformative work, we're of course altering multiple strands or pixels or particles at a time, but just to break down on a simplified but quantifiable level of the infinite amount of pieces that make up who we are physically and energetically, you can understand that all of these practices that we do to get us more aligned with source energy, such as meditation or journaling or anything that we're doing to heal and support our constant evolution and our constant expansion of our consciousness. This is all contributing to the raising of our frequency on this transformational journey that we are on. So this may, again, just seem like a random way to visualize it, but I do trust that it's helping to set the foundation of what I'm going to describe today, because I want to speak on consciousness and timelines and how this relates to the topic of today's video, which is our inner child, our present self, and our higher self. And these three versions of ourself are three layers of the same consciousness that is you, your soul's consciousness. And these three versions or three layers exist across time and awareness. So ultimately, your consciousness can exist at many different points. It's like a radio station that you can tune into, but they all three exist. And wherever your attention is directed dictates the timeline that you're truly living on. But again, the timeline can only be perceived through your consciousness. And so again, all timelines are existing, but it's where your awareness and your attention goes that dictates the timeline that you perceive as your direct and immediate reality. So with the inner child, the present self, and the higher self, when they are aligned, life feels calm and meaningful and guided. And when they're disconnected, we feel confusion, fear, we repeat unhealthy cycles. And so today I want to talk about how we align and connect these three versions of self and the triangle that connects them in the process of our spiritual awakening and our transformation and healing. And this includes the ego degradation that many of us are doing, especially those of us on the twin flame journey. But even if you don't resonate with that or identify with that, this is very much something that you are being called to do if you're here and this message is resonating for you. So let's begin with the inner child. So the inner child is rooted in past emotional memories that are not necessarily your current reality, but they are the memory of your nervous system. They are the data that results from the past experiences and memories that you have endured. And if you are in this collective and coming across this video, you likely are somebody who's on a intense spiritual awakening or transformational journey, which involves healing a lot of your inner child, healing your past childhood trauma, whatever this may be. And you may be anywhere along that journey. You may have just started, or you may have been healing your inner child or your childhood trauma for a decade or more by now. But regardless, if this resonates for you, then you are part of this collective that has had a great deal of inner child work to do in this lifetime. And so I also want to be clear that because these are very quantum concepts, the inner child doesn't necessarily represent the past, although you could make the analogy that the inner child is your past, the present self is your current or now version of self, and the higher self is your future, or at least the direction that you seek to go in. But I also just want to clarify that, yes, because these are past experiences and past memories, and of course we do live in the physical realm, which is constricted by space and time. But because these are quantum concepts, on a quantum level, the inner child is simply just data. It's the consciousness that focuses on that data from those memories. Because, like I said, your inner child is holding that encoded information based on those past experiences that we had in the physical realm. And of course, the physical realm is bound by time, so we can associate this with our past. So I hope that that makes sense. I know it's very tricky to describe these concepts, switching between the more quantum, energetic, spiritual realm and the physical realm that we exist in. Well, we exist in both, but the physical realm is what many of us are much more grounded in. So, the inner child houses our feelings, especially those that are rooted in attachments or survival needs. This includes emotional experiences or unmet needs that made us feel unsafe. And this is where the majority of our triggers come from. And it's also important to recognize that when we spend a lot of time in a state of survival or not feeling safe or feeling that nervous system dysregulation, the ego learns to take over as a protective mechanism. But the ego falls prey to repetitive cycles and believes it to be the truth of our existence or the truth of our identity when that's not always the case. But this is just how the ego operates, and it's a normal response. It's just unfortunate that for many of us who had repeated experiences that taught us limiting self-beliefs or taught us that we were not safe or taught us that we wouldn't be able to survive or taught us that we weren't deserving of love or self-worth or self-trust, all of these things, then our ego takes that on as our identity. And the repetition is key. And the repetition can be your greatest enemy or your greatest strength. So for many of us, we are learning to rewire the way we see the world. And that includes catching yourself when you're triggered, catching yourself when you start thinking negatively about yourself. And it's only when we repeatedly catch ourselves and pivot the attention, pivot the thought, pivot the emotion, that we're able to start rewiring our brain. And then on a quantum level, this raises our energetic frequency and allows us to manifest in more abundance. This is what many of us in this spiritual collective are working on in their healing journey. And so ultimately, you can understand that the repetition of unhealthy experiences or attachments or thought patterns that you had as a child is often causing there to be a lot of work for us to undo. So now that we kind of understand the origin of all of this and how our early childhood experiences determined many of our core beliefs about our safety as well as our self-worth and self-love, we can understand that this became our baseline that was energetically encoded or imprinted like a blueprint. This is the data that we're speaking of, that the inner child holds. But at the same time, we know that our core beliefs can be changed, like a blueprint that can be edited. And so another way that we can understand this is to imagine the inner child like a soil or a garden of soil that is so fertile and open, because the inner child isn't just all pain and trauma. It's also our capacity for curiosity, wonder, play, joy, intuition. But because it's a garden that is so open, it's like a sponge that is so vulnerable. it is also easy for weeds to grow there, right? I mean, beautiful seeds of flowers and trees can be planted, but so can weeds. And so you can start to see how your childhood environment is crucial to determine what grows in the garden. And I use the analogy often on this channel of our ego and our egoic spirals being the metaphor for watering the weeds. So again, your inner child is not inherently wounded or negative as its main identity. But again, if you're listening to this, you're in this collective and you're on this spiritual transformation and spiritual awakening journey that is healing your inner child. And so it is the wounds and the healing and cleansing of those wounds and past pain that we are focusing on. These are the wounds that cause us to seek external validation, or they cause us to react from fear rather than truth or love. And they cause us to repeat old cycles and patterns in our relationship dynamics because of the limiting self-beliefs that were repeatedly instilled in us. So as you can see now, your present self is on a journey of tending to this garden and digging up the old weeds and making the soil healthy again and planting new seeds and watering those seeds and allowing them to grow. That's the beautiful transformational process that we're in right now. So, before I speak more on the present self, I want to talk about triggers. So, anytime we are experiencing an emotional reaction, it is based on some unresolved emotional memory stored in your nervous system. And most of those memories do come from childhood, which is why we're associating them with the inner child. But it's when we experience the emotion without having a moment to choose the emotion, that's what makes it a reaction or even a trigger rather than a response. And so we're going to talk more about choice and regulation when we talk about the present self. But you can see now that the inner child, which for many years has been led by the ego out of a survival response or mechanism, the inner child bypasses choice and goes straight to the emotion. And we can also understand that triggers are not a weakness. They are not due to some void within us or some immaturity or some failure to heal. They are simply signals that are completely natural and to be expected of the human experience, because the ego is also a completely normal part of the human experience. But they are signals that come from your emotional memory, and they show you where you once lacked safety. So, as I said before, there is an element of time because we're speaking on emotional memories that were from past experiences. But these signals are not factual in the sense of the certainty of lacking safety in the present moment. So, for example, you may have been abandoned in the past, and if you're being triggered in the present moment, that doesn't mean that you are actually being abandoned in the now moment. And even if you are, the beauty of the present self is that you have the ability to self-soothe, so that even if you are experiencing abandonment of some kind, you don't have to be a victim to experiencing it in the same way and with the same emotional dysregulation as you did when you were a child. But it's the stories that we tell that are mostly not true. Of course, there's going to be scenarios where you truly are being abandoned, you truly are being neglected. And so if you already have that childhood trigger, then of course it's expected that it will be a very painful and emotionally challenging experience, even in the now moment. But like I said, we have techniques and tools to self-soothe and grow from it. But I want to speak on how most of the time we are triggered based on a encoded past memory when that experience is not actually happening in the now moment. But rather, there is a harmful narrative that causes us to jump to conclusions without having the full story, because it's the ego that feels it needs to take over due to that survival need. So, in other words, there was some emotion we experienced in the past, in our childhood, often repeatedly, that then becomes encoded. So then our ego is kind of on an autopilot, like a computer program that is just following an external cue. And so then now, in the now moment, when we experience something similar, the ego kicks in, begins the computer program, and we enter the timeline of our inner child. We enter that past timeline, which is actually a collapsed timeline. But because our consciousness goes there and our attention focuses on it, it becomes our reality in the now moment. And so that's why when we don't override the ego and these programs in place and rewrite the data that has been encoded into this blueprint, we continue to live in the past and repeat the same cycles. Again, we water those same weeds in our garden, the weeds of subconscious limiting beliefs. And because we continue to repeat that as an adult, the emotional triggers and reactions are able to grow bigger and bigger and more ingrained in us, because the ego is in charge and is doing so for our survival. When the truth is, those experiences are not happening in the now moment. Like I said, it's a collapsed reality. It's a collapsed timeline that is being brought back because of the patterns that are on autopilot. And it doesn't mean that that collapsed timeline is imagined or won't happen again. Of course, there are scenarios where we are being broken up with or fired and we truly are being abandoned, and that's going to trigger us, whether we had a similar inner child experience or whether we have a current emotional response due to that experience. But most of the time, it's simply that our consciousness has locked onto the past and continues to apply that reality in the now moment before we have the full information, or before we're able to self-soothe and remind ourselves of our worth and connection to divine source energy, which we'll speak more about when we get into the higher self. So now that we can see that we don't want to apply the same old meanings and narratives again over and over, and apply these egoic concepts to new situations, because that keeps us limited and stagnant, now we can see the power of the present self, and just how powerful, but also just how much responsibility the present self has in order to heal and evolve ourselves on a soul level. Because with the help of the higher self, the present self understands that even if abandonment and neglect and the most challenging of experiences that we endure on this physical plane, even if those experiences occur, the story and the program is not the truth, and that we are divine beings of infinite potential, and that we always have the power to return to a higher frequency. And we do have the tools and resources available to us to learn how to experience, feel, process, and release the emotions to help us heal. And we have the resilience and the connection to divine source energy. And we have the ability to conjure that inner light to get us back to those higher frequencies. And so this is what it looks like when you have a healed relationship between your inner child and your present self, with, of course, the guidance from your higher self. So moving forward, what do? We now know, at least on an intellectual or mental level, that the inner child brings us these valuable pieces of information through our triggers. And we want to show up in an embodied, anchored way, meaning that it becomes autopilot, it becomes a natural response. We want to show up in a way that is empowered and takes full responsibility for our perceptions of the world and of our life experiences, and takes full responsibility for our responses to the experiences and even the challenges that we endure, especially the ones that are out of our control. And so the way that we do that specifically is learning and practicing repeatedly how to pause, regulate, and choose. And this is an ability that we want to master. And that, again, we only do so through repetition and through practice. And it is especially powerful when we choose differently from our past, because we are overwriting a past blueprint. We're not just choosing from a blank slate. For those of us, again, in this collective that are on this journey of healing the inner child and rewiring our inner world, our beliefs and thoughts and actions. So if you are in this collective and on this journey, your present self is reparenting your inner child. And it's important for you to know that attention is your power. We always have the choice to direct or redirect our attention in any given direction. And so when you simply commit to practicing this, showing up every day committed to this practice, you're on the path towards mastery of self. And so the present self, with the help and with the guidance of your higher self, which I'll talk about more later, is the parent to the inner child, so that the inner child can be free again to experience the wonders and curiosities of life and to experience joy. And when the inner child is not overtaken by the ego and nervous system dysregulation and survival needs, then your intuition is able to come through more clearly and in a stronger way. So your present self is on this journey of practicing this so that our emotions can be felt without spiraling into some limiting story or identity. And your evolved present self is the one that can respond instead of react, and has become so skilled at discernment that our healthy boundaries become natural and automatic. And that's what we mean when we say to show up in an embodied way. It's something that is just a part of our being. It's anchored into our body. And when we say body, we mean all of the codes and the blueprint and the nervous system and the emotional bodies, the energy centers, the chakras that are storing all of these pieces of data. That's what we mean when we always say to embody it and to anchor it in. And it just takes practice and commitment. So, for example, your healed, evolved present self is going through a breakup or being ghosted or something that's causing a trigger of abandonment or neglect, or even being fired and causing you to fall into the spirals of fear and scarcity mindset. It could be anything that is triggering you, but your present self will say, okay, this breakup may lead to separation, or I'm being fired and this may cause a significant hit on my financial security, but I have control over my perception and interpretation of this experience. This is the self-soothing that we talk about. And I have control over what meaning I assign to it. And of course, the higher self will help with concepts like this, like when we feel things like everything is for my highest good, or I am learning resilience from the challenges I endure, or everything happens for a reason. It's when we acknowledge and surrender to the fact that even though we can't see everything clearly, we can learn to self-soothe, and we can continue to trust the universe in whatever unfolds in this lifetime. That, of course, is all the guidance that comes from your higher self. But with the present self, this evolved and healed present self that you've stepped into, you have a much healthier way of interpreting these experiences, the inevitable experiences that we all encounter in our lifetimes that result in us feeling lower frequency emotions. With the scale of consciousness, we are meant to jump around. We're not meant to live fully in love and peace and enlightenment 24/7. We're meant to experience all kinds of frequencies, including shame and guilt and fear and sadness and anger, because the way we respond and learn from those experiences is the way that our soul evolves. It's like, as a species, even from a biological standpoint, we wouldn't evolve if we weren't faced with challenges, or even, again, from a biological standpoint, like in nature, threats to our life or survival. So you can see that even our ego, and even the ways that the ego has kind of kept us limited and trapped, has all been part of our evolution on a spiritual level. So the present self says to the inner child, even when the inner child is triggered and crying and having a tantrum, the healed, evolved present self says to the inner child, I see you, I've got this, I love you, you are worthy, I am worthy. It's the parent that nurtures and supports the inner child unconditionally. And the more we can do this, the more of a master we become at it. We become more automatic. It becomes second nature to self-soothe, and we're able to do it quicker. And this is sovereignty. This is you taking control of your life in the way that you can. Not in the way that outcomes happen, but in the way that you're able to emotionally regulate and soothe and respond to things in a healthy, optimistic way. And so we experience the inner child and the present self and the higher self simultaneously. And they are different modes of awareness. And so, again, our attention is our power. We can switch between them based on our free will and based on our power of choice, the power to choose where we direct our attention. So again, like the dial on the radio, you get to choose what you need in any given moment. And if your inner child is wounded and being triggered and guided or led by the ego, then you know that you need to turn the dial to your higher self to seek guidance. Or you need to turn your dial to the present self that is going to show up in an evolved, mature way that can self-soothe. And so you have the power. And as you do your healing and as you learn the tools and techniques to regulate your nervous system and think in new, healthier ways, and just to know that you are worthy and that you are deserving of love and abundance, the radio channels themselves become infused with more light and of a higher frequency. And so when we talk about entering portals or jumping timelines, this is the work we're speaking of. When you look at your essence, your being, and you break it down into all the strands or beams of light or particles or pixels, each one becomes infused with more and more light as you do that healing, transformative work. And then you quantum leap, because now you're in charge of where your consciousness is, where your awareness and your attention goes, and you've developed the modes of consciousness to choose from that are of such a higher frequency. So your reality, your choices of your reality become so abundant and full of security and joy because of the work that you're doing. So you're not choosing from wounded timelines or points of consciousness. You're choosing from abundant ones. And that's the beautiful transformative work that you're doing as part of your spiritual awakening. And you know when you tap into your higher self that wherever you are on this journey, that you're exactly in the right spot. You're exactly experiencing this journey perfectly. So I want to talk about the higher self in a little bit more detail, because oftentimes the present self doesn't always have the tools or the knowledge to soothe the inner child. And so that is why we need to call upon higher powers, whether it's your angels, your higher self, God, however you resonate with this. So the higher self, or whatever higher powers you're tapping into, this is what is going to give us guidance, direction, clarity, and the knowingness of what we need to detach from. Because the higher self sees beyond our fear and our ego, and it holds our soul's values as the top priority and of the most sacred essence. And so the higher self is able to communicate to you through your intuition, through even signs and synchronicities, how to obtain more resonance and peace in your life. And so it's important to note that even though the higher self will lead you towards more joy and whatever brings you passion in life, there is a sense of neutrality with the higher self. And that's why we speak on detachment, because when you're connected to that higher self, you will feel a calm inner knowing. You'll feel that content alignment with whatever decision or thought or belief is needed to be experienced or channeled to you in the moment. And so even in a heated state where you're being triggered by your inner child, when you tap into your higher self, you'll begin to see it in a neutral, even sometimes a rational perspective. And as you get more experienced and skilled with tapping into the guidance of your higher self and hearing and feeling those intuitive nudges, you will be gifted and supported by your higher self, by the divine. And even if you are being called to make a difficult decision, you'll have a calm and neutral inner peace, and you'll be able to trust in the divine timing. And you won't feel so chaotic or full of fear or seeking validation outside of yourself. And so the present self is the bridge in these moments, especially when you're being triggered and needing to reparent the inner child. The present self is the bridge that can call upon the divine wisdom of your higher self and translate that into a self-soothing and an inner knowing that's going to nurture and heal your inner child. And this translates into you being able to go through life feeling your emotions without them becoming your identity. And you're able to set natural boundaries and provide yourself that support and neutrality. And this is the union of self. We talk a lot about this on the channel, especially for those on the twin flame journey, and the union of the inner divine feminine and inner divine masculine. And this is what we're getting at. We're getting at this harmonious union of the dualities that make us who we are. That's what masculine and feminine really are meant to represent. They're not meant to be connected to gender. They're just simply energetic archetypes. So the masculine is providing the protection and structure and leadership. And you do that when you learn to self-soothe, when you learn to tap into that inner knowing. And the feminine is then able to feel things deeply and reflect and receive and visualize. And together they are in harmony, and that's what makes you a sovereign being. And it's only when the inner child is healed that we can tap into that creative flow and that intuition. It's only in those moments, because we're unable to indulge in our curiosities and our creative passions and open ourselves enough to hear our intuition and inner guidance and inner knowing when we are in that triggered, traumatized, dysregulated state of the wounded inner child. And so it's through this inner child healing that we're able to access higher timelines. So while in the past we were on a timeline that may have said, people will leave me and I am unsafe and I need to chase things to obtain fulfillment and joy. Now we're on a timeline that says, people may leave me, but I always remain intact. I follow my joy. I follow my creative passions. I have full control over how I respond to life. And I am always receiving new clarity and wisdom. And so we can jump between these timelines. You can access any timeline at any given moment. But the key, the trick, is to make the higher timelines your default ones. Make them second nature to you. Put them on autopilot, because then you're locked into abundance. And we'll never do this perfectly. Of course, some trigger will come up. Again, we're meant to jump around on the scale of consciousness. We're not meant to just stop feeling triggered, of course. So, of course, triggers will come. Challenging emotional experiences will come. And we'll always have the option to slip into the lower timeline. But if you've created the strong foundation and baseline through your healing, then your higher timeline will be the default, so that even in a challenging moment, you'll be able to interpret it from the highest timeline. And so you can see that the timelines aren't really about time. They're about our consciousness and where our attention goes. But they do determine the reality that we live in. And you can see that many people are going through the same experiences in life, but perceiving them and interpreting them in wildly different ways, because they're operating from completely different realities. There's people who are enduring the same exact challenges and walking out the other side with completely opposite perspectives. Some from a victim mindset, some from an optimistic, healed, empowered mindset. And so you recognizing that you get to choose your reality immediately puts you on the path to your higher timeline. And this is exactly what we're talking about when we say that you're an empowered sovereign being and that you're the co-creator of your life, along with the universe, which of course controls the divine timing and the how and the who, whereas you get to choose what it is that you want to be feeling in your highest timeline. And anchor in the knowingness that you can conjure those feelings on your own, and the knowingness that you deserve to receive those feelings through your experiences in this life. This is the beautiful co-creation that we talk so much about on this channel. So, knowing this, I hope that this gives you some encouragement on your path of healing your inner child, and a perspective that involves you kind of loosening the reins, because I'm feeling for a lot of the collective, we cling really tightly to the expectations of our healing journey, and we feel like we should be more evolved or more mature or more wise, and we forget to enjoy the experiences, including the difficult triggers that we just shame ourselves for, instead of recognizing them as an opportunity for growth and healing, and that is the purpose of our existence in this physical realm. So again, I hope that this helps you kind of dance with the universe more. And I say loosen the reins because it's this feeling of knowing that exactly where you are is perfect. And that's the higher self coming in and soothing your present self, so that then your present self can soothe your inner child when you do face those triggers. And this is the beautiful shadow work and light work and inner divine union that you are doing. Like, you're already doing it. So there's something to feel joy about. There's something to feel fulfilled, knowing that you're on a spiritual path. You're in a spiritual transformation. That alone is such a gift and something to feel so at peace about. And so when we talk about healing and inner work, it's not about the future outcome. It's about choosing not the future, but the present reality, because that's all you have in any given moment. And I know that's kind of a cliche concept, but when you actually live it, it's completely transformational. And you know this because you're doing it. And just remember that the human experience is not one perspective or one moment or one nervous system. We have multiple timelines and points of consciousness. And so the higher self is the consciousness that is aware of all of these multiple timelines. And the higher self can see patterns rather than individual moments. And so that's why your higher self can operate from a knowing that is of a higher frequency. And it is the power of that observation, the power of your choice that taps you into that energy of abundance in any given now moment. Because healing is not about fixing the past or changing our future. It's all a present moment experience. It's not about changing how we feel or changing our current reality. It's about having the awareness and directing our attention towards resonance. And that's when we obtain coherence on our existing timeline and in our existing reality. It's neutrality that is the space from where new realities can form. And so that's why that calm and peaceful clarity that the higher self gifts us, it may feel foreign or uncomfortable to us, depending on where we're at on our journey. But when we surrender to the infinite possibilities of how, when, who, all of these details that are not our burden to bear, when we surrender, then we experience that neutrality. And we allow space to receive in that which the universe has planned for us, rather than trying to overpower the power of the universe or divine source energy, or trying to neglect its value. That's why it's a co-creative, dual effort process. So really tap in and have a felt and embodied gratitude for the present moment, because that's where you have the power of observation, awareness, and choice as divinely guided by your higher self. And that is how we find ourselves in higher timelines. And in a matter of an instant, the way that you direct your awareness and attention can immediately transport you to a higher timeline. And then suddenly the things associated with that lower timeline won't resonate with you anymore. But you'll be in a higher state of coherence and in a higher frequency and in a higher alignment with your own soul's essence. And so a quick way that you can prompt yourself, especially in moments of being triggered, is to ask yourself which timeline has just activated here, because that will immediately move you into the observer mode and put you in the state of awareness, which from there is how we are able to direct or redirect our attention. And you can ask yourself, what timeline do I want to exist in instead of this one? And a simple moment to feel into that and visualize that can help quantum leap you in an instant and pivot your energy immediately, because suddenly you're tapping into your higher self. And when you do this in an embodied way, meaning you sit and meditate and close your eyes and feel into your body, then your present self is activated into this timeline as well. And that's when you have the healthiest, most connected relationship between your higher self and your present self. So when you have that moment to sit and pause and reflect, again, especially in response to a particular trigger, now you have the best possible energetic frequency to go back to the inner child and do the self-soothing and rewriting that needs to happen to, again, anchor this growth into your body and your reality and have it show through your actions, through the way you express yourself, because you've made that shift in how you perceive or interpret the particular experience or emotion. And so this is why nervous system regulation and somatic work and taking the time in real time, like nothing is more important when you are being triggered than you pausing and bringing your attention to your body and your sensations and observing your emotions and your breath and stabilizing in your awareness. There is nothing more important to do in that moment. As busy as you are, your triggers don't deserve to be neglected or ignored. It's like your inner child doesn't deserve to be neglected or ignored. And so when you suppress or avoid the emotion, you lose out on that opportunity to embrace that observer power and that power of choice. And you lose out on that opportunity to rewrite the blueprint and pivot the energy and shift to a higher timeline. So again, we talk about this so much on the channel. The trigger is such a blessing and a gift. And it's not a burden. It's information that is a portal to you healing and shifting your reality. So allow yourself to receive the gift and make the most of it. Because when you can alchemize that trigger, that heated, intense, chaotic emotion, when you can alchemize that into what the higher self leads you to, which is a tone that is slower and quieter and more spacious and more neutral and peaceful, that alchemy is exactly what's determining the life that you live. So do you want to live in the timeline of triggers, or do you want to live in the timeline of the neutrality of your higher self, creating infinite potential for abundance for you? So I'm going to close this message here. I really hoped that this has helped you in some way. And I would, as always, love to hear from you in the comments what breakthroughs you might be having or what messages resonated really strongly with you. And as I always say, every like, every subscribe means so much to me as we're starting out building this community. So thank you for being here and being a part of this collective and being so dedicated to your spiritual transformation. And if you have any requests of readings you'd like, I am all open to it. And until next reading, have a wonderful day. Bye.